120, short, 5 left, 10. Keep left over crest bump, 120.
Coming up in the show today, we head to Cadwell Park for the Alan Healy Memorial Rally. We go to Scotland for the Snowman Rally, and we take a look at the next rounds of the F1000 Junior Championship and All-Wheel Drive Safari Championship. But before all of that, is off to Weston Park for the Paintworks AGBO Stages. The Paintworks AGBO Stages is the first round of the Heart of England Championship. In this coverage, we take a look at those championship contenders, as well as a look at the top of the overall results. It's not uncommon to see a two-wheel drive car near the top of the results, and with the AGBO Stages being a two-wheel drive only event, we're going to see it a lot this weekend. And taking up the early lead in the Peugeot 205 were Andy Corner and Aid Camp. It wasn't a big lead though. After 3 stages, the pair hold a 2-second advantage over Oliver and Ben Davies in the Escort. After their run on the Northwest stages didn't exactly go to plan, Damien Cole and Elliot Edmondson would be out again in the Escort, and if they thought Blackpool was slippery, they would be in for a real shock here. 3rd place for now and a 7-second gap to the car ahead. An overall time they would share with Hugh James and Jim Goodman in the Class C Escort. They would have been faster than Cole on stage 1, but he took the time back on the 2nd stage. And rounding out the top 5 overall were Jeff Roberts and Steve Hallmark in the next Class C Escort, 5 seconds behind Cole and James at this stage. On to a look at the championship crews then, and a great start for Paul Evans and Lowell Powell as they lead the way with a 7-second advantage over the next championship crew. And that 2nd place championship crew were Lee Edwards and Ben Crump. The pair had made some changes to the car for this season, and it seemed to be paying off with some good times at this stage in the rally, despite the odd scare due to the slippery conditions. For Colin Charles and Martin Woodcock, it would be 3rd. The Escort pair made a good tyre choice for the conditions to end the morning stages in that podium position. Tyre choice, though, wasn't an issue for James Nicholls and David Allman, who lie 3rd in Class C, as they only had 1 set. And they were slicks. Hardly the tyre of choice, but things were not going too bad with 4th place. It would be a good start to the day for Simon Hunter and Dale Traynor as they lead the way in Class A. The lack of power in the almost standard 1300 Peugeot didn't seem to be too much of a disadvantage in these wet conditions. It was also a class lead in Class B this time for David Williams and Jeff Davies, the pair's first visit to these stages, so it was all about settling in at this stage. Lee Griffith started his rallying with this event last year, and with new co-driver Chris Whittle alongside, it was a steady start. And 6 seconds further back in 8th were Dave Rennox and Darren Parsons. The pair were lying 4th in the class, though there was still plenty of room for improvement on the times. Ian Hambleton and Christopher Cope were one of many to be struggling with the slippery conditions. However, a loose bolt on the steering rack wasn't going to help the confidence when it came to sliding around these stages. And rounding out the top 10 in the championship at this stage would be Jason Douglas and Corey Douglas. The car having undergone a winter rebuild. However, that did mean they only have 30 miles on the new engine, so it would be a slightly cautious start, understandably. With their new car not quite ready in time, it would be a JRS hire car for the first round for 11th placed Owen Rowlands and Chris Page. Jack Didcock would be out competing on his first ever rally this weekend, but with experienced navigator Chris Williams alongside, they were settling in well. A steady start for Jeffrey Orchard and James Palmer as they lie 5th in Class B. A return to the stages after a year away, so it was all about getting the feeling back in the car. And in 14th place, rounding off our championship crews, were Barry Wilmot and Claire Bird in the Nova, lying 4th in Class A at this stage too. Back to the top of the leaderboard for our championship crews, and it would still be a lead for Paul Evans and Lowell Powell, a lead which had increased now to 22 seconds. The change of tyres to a cut slick on the later stages in this loop seemed to be going well in the drying conditions. Lee Edwards and Ben Crump remained in 2nd place at this stage and indeed in the lead of Class C. But a moment of red mist while catching a car in front of them caused a bit of a spin on stage 4 and lost the pair a handful of seconds. A move up 1 place on the order for James Nicholls and David Allman as they lie 2nd in Class C and 3rd place overall. Their lack of tyre choice wasn't as much of a problem now, with slicks being what was needed. Colin Charles and Mark Woodcock slipped down a place in the overall standings to 4th, and with it, slipped down to 3rd in their class. No change for Simon Hunter and Dale Traynor as they still lie in 5th, and of course in the lead of Class A. Still no dramas for Lee Griffiths and Chris Whittle, and in fact they make a move up the order and take up the Class B lead. This move putting them in 6th place. That change means for David Williams and Jeff Davies it's a step down to 7th, and of course a move to 2nd in their class. Their seeding still not helping when it came to catching cars in the stages. Jason and Corey Douglas were making a move up the results now, and they were settling in a little more. They move up to 8th and also remain 3rd in the class. A spin on stage 6 would cost Ian Hambleton and Christopher Cope a handful of seconds. They remain 9th overall in the championship, as well as 2nd in the class. And for Owen Rowlands and Chris Page, it would be a place gained to round off the top 10, the pair taking it steady in the hire car, 3rd in Class A. Jack Didcock and Chris Williams have a little incident with a bail in stage 6, causing a little cosmetic damage, but for a first event, it could be expected. They lie in 11th place now and 4th in their class. And it was all about getting back into the groove for Jeffrey Orchard and James Palmer. They remain 5th in the class and a respectable 12th overall. Barry Wilmot and Claire Bird continue to round out the championship results now in 13th place in that Nova. On to the final results then, and 13th of our championship crews at the end of the AGBO Stages would be Jeffrey Orchard and James Palmer. Jack Didcock and Chris Williams lose out on a place in the final stages to finish in 12th. But for a first rally in a somewhat standard car, this was certainly a good way to start the season. Barry Wilmot and Claire Bird make a move in the right direction on the results as they end the day in 11th place. There was, however, only 2 seconds separating the final 3 places in the results. Owen Rowlands and Chris Page remain where they were for the final stages and end the event rounding out the top 10 and also netting themselves 3rd in Class A. Ian Hambleton and Christopher Cope also remain where they were, 9th overall in the championship and 2nd in the class, just over a minute ahead of Rowlands at the end of the day. Jason and Corey Douglas take home 3rd in Class B. It would be a great 8th place finish too. 23 seconds would be the difference in the class as David Williams and Jeff Davies finish ahead of Douglas to take 2nd in the class. Unfortunately, the overall power disadvantage got the better of Simon Hunter and Dale Traynor as they slipped down a place in the final, drying stages, and they end the day 6th. They do, however, keep a commanding lead in the class, which of course was the main aim of the weekend. Lee Griffiths and Chris Whittle were the ones who just managed to pip Hunter to that place. They end the day in 5th position and themselves win their own class battle for maximum points in Class B1. There wouldn't be any change in the top of the results, with Colin Childs and Mark Woodcock remaining in 4th place. It was close though, just 4 seconds separated them from 2nd in class James Nichols and David Allman, who just managed to take away a podium finish overall in the championship this weekend. For Lee Edwards and Ben Crump, it was a little more comfortable, but only just, as they have a 13-second advantage at the end of the event to take the class win. But taking victory with a good 41 seconds advantage, no, not good, great advantage, particularly in these conditions over the closest championship crew, were Paul Evans and Lowell Powell. A great start to the season for the pair in that new car. Before we leave the AGBO Stages, let's take a quick look at the final overall results away from the championship. And Hugh James, with Jim Goodman alongside, would remain in the top of the results all day to end up with 5th overall. Jeff Roberts and Steve Hallmark gain a place towards the end of the day to finish in 4th. And there was nothing more Damien Cole and Elliot Edmondson could do to climb the results as they end the event on the podium. Which means for Andy Corner and Aid Camp, it would be a well-deserved 2nd place. The early event leaders had shown great pace in that 2:05 to take a fantastic result at the finish of this rally. And on to our winners. For Oliver and Ben Davies, it was victory at the AGBO Stages. They moved into that position earlier in the day and held it to the end, taking the win by 12 seconds, which, although not comfortable, means they had to be on it to the finish. Perfect for the spectators and for us at home. So at the end of the 2014 Paintworks AGBO Stages, here's a look at the championship results. Still to come in this episode of Special Stage Extra, we head to Lincolnshire, to Cadwell Park for the Alan Healy Memorial Rally. We're in Wales for the AWDC, bit of off-road racing, and we're at Anglesey for the Junior 1000 Rally Championship. And don't forget, we're also heading to Scotland for the Snowman Rally. See you soon.
Round 1 of the ARR Craib Scottish Rally Championship, the Arnold Clark Thistle Snowman Rally, started from its usual base in Inverness, with a strong entry of 115 cars ready to tackle the 5 stages. With the snow of last year replaced by wet and damp conditions, it was reigning champions David Bogie and Kevin Ray who took the lead in the morning, arriving at service with a 24-second lead over rival Focus crew Ewan Thorburn and Paul Beaton. Ewan confused by his relative lack of pace. Two top 4 times put Mike Faulkner and Peter Foy in third at this stage, and being chased by the similar Evo of Quintin Milne and Martin Forrest. This crew suffering by being first on the road in the slippery conditions. Benefiting from a good road position and some pre-event tuition from Milne, Dougal Brown and Lewis Rochford lay in 5th at this stage in the 3rd Evo 9 in the top 5. Missing from the leaderboard were Jock Armstrong and Paula Swinsko. After being 3rd on stage 1, their Subaru broke a drive shaft in stage 2, ending their event. On to the classes, and despite feeling the car was down on power, Andrew Gallagher ended the morning in 8th overall and 1st in Class 10, with reigning class champions John Morrison and Peter Carstairs a few places back after a small off in stage 2. The Dolomite sprint of Ken Wood took the lead in Class 9, ahead of Robert Harkness and Mike Curry in their BMW. Harkness discovering that the car only had one-wheel drive as they left the start. In Class 7, the Civic R3 of Graham Schernville and Michael Hendry arrived at first service with over a minute in hand over the Ford Focus of John McLeod and Ian Much. The brand new Mark I Escort of Willie and Laura Stewart took a commanding early lead in Class 6. The car having only completed 23 miles before the start, they were over 2 minutes up on Colin Acheson's Vauxhall Chevette HSR at first service. Reigning Class 4 champions Ian Wilson and Keith Fremantle took the early 1600 lead. Their pace good enough for them to be challenging the top two-wheel drive runners. Just under a minute back came Kieran Renton and Dave Robson. Kieran mindful of a string of accidents at the end of 2013. Scott Peacock took the early class lead in Class 3, despite losing a brake pipe on stage 2, leaving him with just the handbrake. While Simon Hayes' pace continued to improve from 2013, and he lay second in class, less than a minute back in his similar 205. In Class 2, it was the experienced Alex Pirri and David Law who took an early lead in the Toyota Yaris, entering first service just over a minute up on Snowman first-timers Derek Connell and Laura Marshall, the young driver pleased with his pace on only his second Forest Rally. Midway through the day then, and a reminder of the top of the results. On to the second half of the day, and a big shake-up in Class 2 as early leader Alex Pirrie retired on Stage 3 and Derek Connell dropped 4 minutes on the final stage to allow Lindsay Henderson to take second in her MG and Scott Macbeth to grab the win in the Nova by almost 3 minutes at the finish. The status quo remained for Class 3 with Simon Hay and Callum Jaffray recording second in class behind day-long leaders Scott Peacock and Sue Hind. Once their brake problems were cured, they enjoyed a close battle with the unregistered Scott McDonald losing out by just 1 second at the finish. Early Class 4 leaders, Ian Wilson and Keith Fremantle, disappeared off the leaderboard after an off. Kieran Renton dropped back, allowing the Civic of Duncan Campbell and Gavin Chisholm into second at the finish. Just 18 seconds up was the R2 Fiesta of Peter Stewart and Kenneth Marchbank after a late event charge. In Class 6, early pacesetters Willie and Laura Stewart retired on Stage 4 while in a comfortable position. This allowed Colin Aitchison to score the class win in the Chevette, co-driven by Gary Pearson. The R3 Civic of Graham Chernerville appeared to be in control of Class 7 until their throttle cable broke, allowing the John McLeod Focus to top the class by 20 seconds at the finish. In Class 9, the Harkness BMW retired after removing a rear wheel on a tree stump on Stage 3. While Kenwood's Triumph suffered engine problems. This promoted Stuart Glendenning and Craig Robb up to second in class in the Puma. They were over 3 minutes back from the Ford Escort of Scott Kerr, who took a comfortable class win. Class 10, John Morrison and Peter Carstairs managed to close in on Andrew Gallagher and Phil Sandham to finish only 34 seconds behind their Evo rivals in 11th overall. Gallagher survived his down on power engine to win the class and finished 9th overall. In the overall battle, a late event charge from Barry Groundwater and Neil Shanks snatched them 5th place on the last stage from Dougal Brown and Lewis Rochford. They finished 50 seconds down on David Bogie and Kevin Ray, who, after their fast start, suffered a puncture on Stage 3. Lucky to survive with no damage apart from time loss, they were fastest on the final 2 stages to salvage 4th overall. Keeping up their consistent top 4 pace all day, Mike Faulkner and Peter Foy recorded their best finish on the Snowman in recent years, despite being unable to hold back Quintin Milne and Martin Forrest, who put in a couple of really fast stage times towards the end of the day to snatch second by only 3 seconds. Taking the win despite finishing the rally with a burst brake pipe, held together with 20 cable ties, were Ewan Thorburn and Paul Beaton. After a trouble-filled SRC Championship last season, luck appeared to be on their side this time, and they held on to win by 34 seconds at the finish at Inverness. So at the end of the event, here is a reminder of all the overall results. Still to come on the show, we visit Cadwell Park for the Alan Healy Memorial Rally and head to Wales for the All-Wheel Drive Club Safari Championship and the F1000 Junior Championship.
The TJS Self-Drive Alan Healy Memorial Stages attracted a fantastic entry once again, with its mix of club competitors and those regularly seen on the UK's premier Asphalt Rally Championship, and with so much action to show you, let's get straight to the stages. Unfortunately, it will be a short-lived and dramatic event for number 1 seeds David Turnbull and Howard Pridmore. They overcook it and end up rolling the car after hitting the Armco. A little shaken, but driver and co-driver both walk away okay. What this means is after 3 stages, we would see David and Alice Tin in the lead of the event with just a slim margin, only 6 seconds. It was only the second event in the car, so it was certainly a good start. Carl and Guy Simmons will be the ones to take second at this stage of the rally. The Impreza pair were looking good on the stage times and were only 2 seconds a stage down on the lead at this point. Tristan Pye and Stuart Merry were the first of the non-WRC cars in the top of the results. They lie in 3rd place, just 4 seconds behind Simmons. Asphalt Championship frontrunners John Stone and Carl Williamson started well and end stage 3 in 4th place. They were on an identical overall time to Pye in front and just 10 seconds off the lead, something which could have been very different had it not been for a stall on the hairpin in stage 3. Losing the pair the lead they had held up to the start of this stage. And in 5th place would be Johnny Ellis and Dave Green. Robbed of a win at Brands Hatch earlier in the year due to a puncture, this weekend would be about another chance. Just a further 5 seconds behind at this stage. A look at the classes then here at Cadwell Park. And in Class D, Andrew Bayliss and Chris Sharp-Simkis would open up an early lead of 24 seconds in the class. Certainly a good start considering the seeding in the BMW. Pete Rayner and Richard Bonner would lie in 2nd, but put the pace down to not waking up properly at this stage. Still, 2nd was a good place to be, and hopefully the stages would continue to dry out and the crew would continue to wake up. After initial fears that the car wouldn't arrive from Ireland in time for the event, Michael Pickles and James Crossland were thrown in at the deep end. Or the water, at least, this being the first time the pair had used this car in the wet. And despite a small spin on stage 3, it was going well in 3rd place. Things would all be a little closer in Class C, as leaders Mark Tarbut and Jeff Hay end stage 3 with only a 2-second advantage in their Peugeot 306 Maxi. Martin Hodgson and Tony Jones were the ones in 2nd. The pair were slightly cautious after coming across the accident of David Turnbull soon after it had happened, but it didn't slow them down for long, 2 seconds off the lead and going well. For Ashley Davies and Will Barnard in a Peugeot 205, it would just be 1 second separating them from Hodgson ahead. About as close as it could get really, the top of the class all keeping each other on their toes. A slightly smaller entry in Class B wouldn't mean any less rivalry, as early leaders Andrew and Dennis Turner open up a good lead in the class, despite an early fuel problem on stage 2. Which means it's 2nd for Barry and Helen Grant. The gap was 45 seconds to the leaders, but from here on in the class results were a whole lot closer. Starting with 3rd place, Michael and Rebecca Boynes in the Citroën Visa. Not the most common car to see on the stages, these days at least, but they were just 4 seconds off the Peugeot ahead. In Class A, it would be the Proton of Graham Gibbs and Rhys Elliott who gained the early advantage. An achievement in itself after Graham retired on the first corner of the event this time last year. The lead at the top was 20 seconds, and it will be Ian Barnard and Andy Bull that take up 2nd place for now. There wouldn't be much between 2nd and 3rd, as David and Matt Wood lie just 3 seconds back in that final podium place at the end of 3 stages. Back to the overall leaderboard then, and there will be no change at the top with David and Alice Tin still leading the way in that Proton. The lead, however, hadn't grown and was still just 6 seconds. With the stall behind them, John Stone and Carl Williamson were back on it. And a move up a place into second was demonstrating that nicely. Chasing down the leaders, but with the times so close, it wasn't going to be easy. Carl and Guy Simmons slipped down into third, but there still would be only 12 seconds between them and Stone, so things were certainly going well at this stage. Johnny Ellis and Dave Green were another pair to make a move the right way up the results, as they step up to fourth now, another 12 seconds holding them back from the podium places. And that change, of course, would be at the expense of Tristan Pye and Stuart Merry, who slipped down into fifth, just 6 seconds behind the similar car of Ellis. We see no change in the lead of Class D at this stage, as Andrew Bayliss and Chris Sharp-Simkis keep up the good pace to stay ahead of the rest of the class after stage 6. Despite waking up a little more, by their own admission, Pete Rayner and Richard Bonner were still in second, unable to catch the crew ahead, although the gap did shrink slightly by just a second. Much of the same over these stages for Michael Pickles and James Crossland as they continue to lie in third, themselves 21 seconds behind Rayner at this stage. All change in Class C as we get a new leader. Previous second place Martin Hodgson and Tony Jones step up now to take the lead of the class, a lead of 9 seconds as well. It was also a move in the right direction for Royston and Bridge Carey. The setup on the car was certainly looking good and the times were getting better too. Second place was a good place to end the morning stages. For previous class leaders Matt Tarbert and Geoff Hay, it was a drop down to third in the class. They were now 14 seconds off the lead they held this morning, but could they do anything to get that back? There would be little in the way of change in Class B, certainly not at the top anyway, as Andrew and Dennis Turner continue to lead the way, now by almost a minute. Things were going well, especially considering the change to left-hand drive for the first time. Barry and Helen Grant wouldn't have any change from their second place either. They continued to hold everyone else at bay, even if they couldn't catch the class leaders themselves. Change in this class would come in third place, as Chris Bellamy and Ashley Thorpe make a move the right way up the results into that final podium position. The lead of Class A wouldn't change. Graham Gibbs and Rhys Elliott continuing to dominate Class A and putting that non-finish of last year out of their minds to concentrate on keeping the class lead this year. It was a lead that had shrunk slightly though, but only by 3 seconds, as Ian Barnard and Andy Bull continue to get to grips with the new car ahead of their Asphalt Championship season campaign. We do have a change in third though, as we see Anthony and Christopher Newton make a great jump up the leaderboard to move into that place in the Nova. On to the final roundup then, and in Class A it would be David and Matt Wood that take third in that class, as well as 53rd overall in the rally, gaining that podium place in the last stages of the day. And it's second in the class for Anthony and Christopher Newton as they finish in 51st on the leaderboard. The reason though for all the changes at this late stage in the rally would be the loss of Graham Gibbs and Rhys Elliott from the lead. The pair don't retire though, instead they slip down to 8th, with the combination of the gearbox being held in by a ratchet strap after the bolts broke and a wrong split on one of the stages. That does mean though that in the debut of that newly built car, it will be the class win for Ian Barnard and Andy Bull, who also finished the event in 38th on the leaderboard overall. No dramas in Class B as Chris Bellamy and Ashley Thorpe finished the event in 42nd place overall, as well as rounding off the podium to take third in their class. Meanwhile, just 1 place overall better off for second in class Barry and Helen Grant in the Peugeot 106. But taking the class win, as they had done for the last 2 years previous, were Andrew and Dennis Turner. The pair finished almost a minute and a half ahead in the class, as well as 27th on the overall leaderboard. It would be third in Class C for Matt Tarbert and Geoff Hay. The pair had of course started with the lead, but unfortunately that slipped away as the day went on, and third was about as good as it would get for this weekend at least. They also finished 12th overall. A great finish just inside the top 10 overall in 8th, as well as a great second in class for Royston and Bridge Carey. They tried everything possible to take the class win, including removing the wiper blades to save weight, but it wasn't good enough and they have to settle for second. So that means that Martin Hodgson and Tony Jones take the class win by just 4 seconds. It was close all day, and they just hold off the change from Carey in the final stages to take that class win, and a very good 7th on the leaderboard. It would be a move into the final podium place in Class D for Graham Bell and Russ Radford. They had been level on times with the car behind going into these afternoon stages, but managed to pull away by 10 seconds by the end of the rally. Despite not feeling fully committed, it would still be a good second place finish for Pete Rayner and Richard Bonner. They just miss out on a top 10 overall time as well, as they finish in 11th. So all this means that it's a class win for Andrew Bayliss and Chris Sharp-Simkis. They take victory by 36 seconds and finish a fantastic 6th in the rally. Which leads us on nicely here at Special Stage Extra into the top 5. And in that 5th place were Craig Pennington and Wayne Priest. The times have been good all day, but it was a sneak into the top of the results in the final stages for the pair. Alan Oldfield and Steve McNulty had a progressive run to gain speed over the day's stages and get a little more used to the car. 4th overall was a good result for the pair. And unfortunately we lose Carl and Guy Simmons in stage 7. A disappointing end to a great run, up as high as 2nd at the start of the rally. This does mean though it's a move up a place for Johnny Ellis and Dave Green. They move into the final podium place. Not the victory they were destined for at Brands Hatch earlier in the year, but a great result here at Cadwell Park nonetheless. So for Tristan Pye and Stuart Merry, it will be the runner-up place today. A fantastic result at the end of the day, sometimes taking places vacated by others, but always right up there at the top to do just that. So what about that battle for the lead then? Well, with only one place left, it will be bad news for David and Alice Tin as they retire in spectacular fashion when an unexpected engine problem spells the end of the road for the pair after a fantastic run all day. Disappointing, yes, but they showed the pace was there up until that point. So all that means that taking the victory would be John Stone and Carl Williamson. It may have been by default in the end, but without their own little problems earlier in the day, the pair were well up there and leading the event. So victory was certainly well deserved and marks a long time away from the winner's trophy for the pair. So at the end of the event, here's a reminder of the final results. Coming up after the break here at Special Stage Extra, we head to Anglesey for the F1000 Junior Rally Championship and to Wales for the next round of the Britpart All-Wheel Drive Safari Championship. Last time out then, Chris Bird took a convincing victory on the opening round of the Britpart All-Wheel Drive Safari Championship, and he'll be back again at round 2 trying for a second win of the season. Runner-up Andy DiGiulio is also present at round 2, the current champion looking to get some more points towards his 2014 season campaign. Round 2 of the championship then remains here in Wales, this time swapping the forest tracks for the farm fields and rough tracks of the valleys. It would be an ideal start to the event for Rick and Sandra Mann. The pair had crashed out of the opening round, but things were going well here at round 2. A good lead after the morning's 2 runs. It would all be quite close though, with Kevin Stubbs putting in some good times. In fact, a fastest time on run 2, meaning just 4 seconds separate the top 2 at this stage. Ian Roberts was another putting in the times, a little off the pace of the top on the opening run, but after that it was a second fastest time, just 1 second behind that time of Stubbs. Unfortunately missing from the results were Andy DiGiulio and Paul Jones. Third fastest on the opening run was a great start, however, engine failure would put them out on run 2, a big blow for the championship campaign. Last time out winners Chris and Jonathan Bird wouldn't be making the best of starts either. It certainly wasn't slow, but the pair were off the pace by a few seconds a lap. And unfortunately, with things this close at the top, it was going to mean 4th place for now. Pete Roberts' times were improving. The second run of the day almost a minute quicker than his first. This brought the times back up in line with the front runners. However, the time lost on run 1 was enough to make sure he only goes as far as 5th on the leaderboard for now. And Oliver Arnold's times were not improving by quite as much as Roberts, but they were getting better. 8th fastest, followed by 6th fastest, and lying in 6th place for it. Consistent results last season bagged James and Philippa Tennant 2nd in the championship. So lying in 7th at this stage couldn't be considered a bad thing. especially with this being the first outing in the season for this pair. Tim Philpott was just managing to sneak his way in for a top 10 fastest time on the second run of the day. And it was looking good too. 8th place at this stage, and it was also a good enough time for second in the class. Tim Henry would end these runs in 9th place, just managing to hold on to the top 10 placing in that Milner. And rounding out the top 10 would be Bruce Tigwell. His 22-year-old navigator Alex Hooker was in fact the son of the man who helped Bruce build and navigate in this very car over 24 years ago, which has to be some kind of record. In a few of the classes outside the top 10 then, it would be first in Class 8 for Mike Coward. Jason Nicol and Kirsty Randall were having a good run and lying second in that class at this stage. And a bit of a bad start for Richard Hopkins as he goes off on his first run, which was put down to driving blind after not having a look at the course in advance. But despite this, he still manages to lead Class 2 after the opening runs of the day. Joe Philpott would be second in that class as well, losing time in the second run of the day with a puncture on that Land Rover. And first in Class 4 at this stage will be Jim Dickinson and Oyson Riley, the pair back after an 8-year absence from the sport, so this was a good start at this round. Meanwhile, for Ryan Dunn, it would be second in the class after 2 runs. Class 7 would see an early lead for Scott Benwell, opening up a big gap in the class at this stage. With second in that class belonging to John Solis, who was slowly picking up the pace on the second run of the day. And Adrian Marfell would be the only car in Class 3, so it was the lead for him in that class then. On to the next couple of runs then, and there will be no change at the top as Rick and Sandra Mann continue to lead the way. Although at this stage, Rick was being partnered by Paul Jones after the demise of Di Giulio, conducting some suspension setup on the car. All change in second now though, as suspension failure on the 4th run of the day puts Kevin Stubbs out of the event. Although not so much suspension failure, more like suspension damage after a heavy impact on a compression. So that means it's a step into second now for Ian Roberts. There was less than a minute in the times at the top, but that was a lot if the stage times remained this close. An inherited place then for Chris and Jonathan Bird as they move up to third now. The times were improving by the run, so the push was on for the rest of the day. Just 2 seconds holds the pair away from that second place. Unfortunately for Pete Roberts, the times on the course were getting a little slower, and with no explanation as to why and where the seconds were going, it wasn't looking great for holding on to that 4th place. At this stage, it was safe, but how long was anyone's guess. Things were looking good for Tim Philpott though, as he moves his way up the results to lie in 5th place now. The pace was increasing, and he remains second in the class, with only the rally leader beating him in that position. James Tennant was remaining pretty consistent, it had to be said, and apart from the place gain through retirement ahead, it would be business as usual. Going well though, and enjoying the first time back in the car this season. Tim Henry gains himself another place in these runs to lie in 7th position now. He was moving the right way up the leaderboard, which was encouraging. Things still going right for Bruce Tigwell and Alex Hooker. Steady times and no problems. Equal staying the right side of the top 10 as they pass the midway point in the event. And the top 10 now sees us gain Pete Downey. After suspension failure on the previous round, he would be looking for some luck here, especially after all the work that had gone into the car, both in repairs and in improvements. James and Tom King were enjoying gradually increased pace. They move up to round out the top 10 at the end of run 4. However, it would unfortunately all be over on the very next lap, when the car rolled close to the finish of the stage. Luckily only slow and with no injury. Certainly an experience though for Abby Di Giulio, who was enjoying her second outing as a co-driver at the time. And there would be bad luck on this run for Bob Rawlinson, who comes a little hot into this corner and puts the car on its side. Luckily the built-up mud at the side of the course saved the car from a nasty roll down the hillside. New for this season will be the Safari Light Championship. Less runs, but a smaller entry fee for those just wanting something a little less intense with all the enjoyment. Before we look at the results in the main championship, let's have a quick look at the results in the light series. Rounding out the podium places at the end of the event would be Matthew Barber. The day wasn't the easiest though, with troubles all day. But for a new car and team combination, these things could be expected, I suppose. Third place was a good start to the season. Second place in this new light championship would be Adrian Beer. He had actually started off with fastest times on the opening 2 runs of the day, but they slowed a little as the day went on, and he would eventually be overhauled for the lead of the event. Which means the win in the Safari Light Championship at round 2 goes to Lee Newcomb. The times were good, and after lying in second place for the first few runs, it seems the change in weather would help the pace, and it's win number 1 here this weekend. On to the final results then in the main championship, and a look at the finishers in class order. Second in the 8i class would be Tim Henry. A move up the results a little meant he ended the event in 7th in that Milner. A slip down 1 place in the final stages for Pete Roberts means he finishes 5th on the leaderboard as well as the class win. In Class 8, second place will belong to Brian Dyke. It's also a good move up 2 places in the final stages to take 15th overall. But for Mike Coward, it would be the class win that he'd held all day, just missing out on a top 10 overall finish too, in 11th. In Class 7i, it would be a good finish for Pete Downey. The torrential rain may have misted up the car slightly, but these were the conditions that he liked, and his times were showing it too. A great result to end 6th overall. Tim Philpott would go 1 better in the class and 2 better in the overall results. He finishes the day with that class win under his belt and also finishes just off the podium in 4th. Class 7 would see Tony Rooney taking 2nd at the end of a tricky day's racing, along with 25th overall for his troubles. And for Scott Benwell, it would be victory in the class, as well as ending the day in 20th overall. Jim Dickinson finishes as runner-up in Class 4, ending the event in 22nd. Just behind Ryan Dunn, who finishes a good margin ahead of Dickinson in 21st, taking the Class 4 win. With no competition, it was just a case of finishing, but as we mentioned earlier, that is an achievement in itself. Adrian Marfell, always easier said than done to get finished, and he takes the class win, of course, along with a 24th overall result. The battle for Class 2 honours was sorted right from the start of the day, really, with Joe Philpott unable to match the times at the top and settling for 2nd in the class. This then means with a steady drive to the finish in the now very slippery conditions, it was a win in the class for Richard Hopkins, also finishing close to the top 10 in 12th. So onto the overall podium then, and for Ian Roberts it would be 3rd. It was going well all morning, but unfortunately in the final stages 2nd place would be snatched from him, although mistakes like this were never going to help the overall times. So for Chris and Jonathan Bird, it would be 2nd place. It wasn't the way they wanted to follow up their round 1 victory, but it was a good result, picking up the speed as the day went on and being there to take advantage of the misfortunes of others today to ensure a good finish. But it seemed that there was no stopping Rick Mann this weekend. The times were great, even when the crew felt otherwise, and the car proved its ability on a mix of surfaces, even when the rain came down. The win goes some way to making up for his round 1 non-finish, but for now it will be all eyes on round 3 and the rematch. So at the end of round 2 here in Wales, here's a reminder of the overall results. Stay tuned here at Special Stage Extra. It's action from the next round of the Junior 1000 Rally Championship up next.
Anglesey was the venue for the next round of the Junior Championship. The venue was fast, which meant the cars would be on the limit a lot of the day. And in evenly matched cars, this was going to be all down to bravery. Unfortunately for William Hunt and Emma Morrison, it would be the first retirement on the sheets when they only made it out of stage 1 before retiring, although they would carry on in the trophy rally for some seat time. Possibly more unlucky would be James Williams and Gareth Short, the pair not having any problems all day. In fact, they led the event from the start, but it would all be over on stage 6, when damage to the car would force them to retire. Of those that finished, it would be Kay Thompson and Joe Cruttenden that rounded out the results. The pair have been lying in 12th place for most of the day, but of course retirement for Williams meant that turned into 11th by the end of the day. For Luke Barker and Karen Phelps, it would unfortunately go the other way. They spend the morning in 8th place, only for that to turn into 10th at the end of the event. For Karen, though, the finish was reward enough, after not having the most luck when it comes to a finishing record. Tommy Meadows and Ian Oakey manage a bit of improvement over the later stages of the event. They start off in 11th, and on the final stages pick up the pace, as well as benefiting from retirements, to end the day in 9th place. Zach Hughes and Chris Evans gained a few places during the day. They started in 11th. They have a steady start and move up the order as the day goes on. Their 8th place finish was just 4 seconds behind 7th. And in that 7th place at the end of the event would be Seb Perez and Mark Higgins. But that wasn't how it started. 3rd fastest on the opening stages was a good start, but it went a little wrong after that, with ex-British champion Mark Higgins bringing the pair in a lap too early and dropping them down to 7th. Proof, if ever, that a co-driver's job is not an easy one. Ben Cross and George Morrison had a consistent day. They started off a couple of stages in 6th, which briefly turned into 5th at the midpoint, but by the end of the day the pair had lost a small amount of time and dropped back down a place into 6th once more. Matthew Davies and Mark Crisp were having a good run. They start off steady, with a 9th place after the opening stages, but they were soon picking the pace up and moving the right way up the results. 8th over the middle loop, followed by a move up to 5th on the final stages. A great result for the pair. A small incident with the chicane was about all the problems that Charlie Barlow and Melanie Holmes would encounter on the event. They start the day off at a very good 7th and slowly move their way up the results into 5th, and then finally 4th, where they would finish just a second outside the podium places. First of those podium places would be Harry Williams and Vince Mosley. The pair had a pretty consistent day, and luckily it was at the right end of the results. They start the day in 5th before a move a few more places in the right direction to round out the podium in 3rd. Will Butler and Jan Griffiths were another to have a good run all day. They started it in 3rd place, which was a great improvement in their seeding of 8th. It was unlikely they would have gained any more places based on times. However, the retirement of James Williams promoted them up to 2nd at the end of the day. So with that retirement from the long-time leaders, it would be Will Creighton and Neil Coleman who were there to pick up the pieces at the end of the day and take the victory. They've been 2nd for most of it, and best places to take advantage of the leader's departure. And they take the win by over a minute at the end of the event.